continue with the second roundtable of the day. We have an exciting session on decentralized social networks. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to Marta Franco. She is part of Laintersección, a collective that collaborates with organizations and social movements to design digital strategies and research and nurture new narratives. And she is also the author of a book called Las redes son nuestras, una historia popular de Internet y un mapa para volver a habitarla, which we really recommend. So she's going to moderate this amazing panel. So let's give them a warm welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much, Carol, for your presentation, and to everyone at Decidim. Is it? Yeah? Okay. Okay, I was just saying thank you for everyone in Decidim for organizing this event. And we only have 1 hour, so I'm going to try to be very quick. I'll just tell you that every one of you is going to introduce their projects. And then I'll make several questions for you. And we'll try to save the last 10, 15 minutes for the audience in case you want to make questions, which I'm sure you are going to be willing to make, because you have a lot of things to tell us today. So I'm just gonna read your bios, well, things about you, because I want to make sure that I get it right. So first we have Amandine Pape. She's a COO and co-founder of Element, an open source, secure, and sovereign communication platform built on Matrix, which is the open standard for secure and open communications. Matrix, which Amandine also co-founded, is an initiative aiming to democratize secure online communication and solve the problem of fragmentation between different protocols and technologies. Amandine is also a founding member of the European Open Source Academy. But today, you are here to talk us about Matrix and Element. So, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Matrix, as Marta said, is basically an open standard for secure and decentralized communications. It was created to democratize instant messaging and voice and video over IP, and can be used for any sort of real-time communications. The idea is to be what SMTP is for email, but for real-time comms. We really want people to be able to choose where they host their data and which interface they use to access it. It's an open network of 185 million users, and one of the biggest usage of it is actually by public sector. It's been adopted by multiple governments and organizations like NATO, the UN, the European Commissions, France, Germany, Sweden, and many other governments. And it's managed by a not-for-profit foundation called the Matrix.org Foundation. And then on the side, Element is the company created by the team who created Matrix, and it sells products and services built on top of Matrix, products being mostly open source, and the idea is to help grow the Matrix ecosystem.
So thank you, and thank you for keeping it really short as we talked before. So the next person is Andy Piper. He's the head of communications at Mastodon. Mastodon is an open source platform that relies on the ActivityPub protocol to build decentralized social media, or in other words, what we call the Fediverse. Andy is an experienced technology professional, open source advocate, and social bridge builder based in the UK. And he has an extensive background in companies like IBM and Twitter, as well as a freelance with multiple open source projects and communities. So can you please tell us what Mastodon is for those of you who don't know it?
I think you did some of that actually for me, Marta, but thank you for that. Yeah, so Mastodon is a social network, and it's based on an open standard called ActivityPub. And as Marta mentioned, it's part of a bigger constellation of apps and services that we refer to as the Fediverse, that all use this interoperable protocol. Mastodon started in Germany. It's got very strong European principles at our heart as an organization. We have a company in Germany that employs a number of us, and we announced at the beginning of this year that we are transitioning into a non-profit foundation in Europe, to keep this moving forward in a very open way. And I think that's probably all I need to say about it at the moment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And the last one is Robin Berjon. He's a technologist specialized in the governance of digital tech. He's deputy director at the IPFS Foundation. Previously, he worked on data governance at the New York Times and was vice chair of the board of the World Wide Web Consortium, which is an organization that developed the ActivityPub protocol, among many other cool things that we all love. His work focuses on building durable democratic governance of technology so that our digital sphere starts operating in the public interest. And that's why you are here today to talk about the Free Your Feeds projects.
Yeah, thank you. Now, so hi everyone, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here. Free Your Feeds is a little bit complicated to explain. It's not as straightforwardly a protocol or a product, but I shall try to keep it short. Essentially, it's initially a campaign to create a billionaire-proof social media, and that's just a slogan. So what does it mean in practice? Well, at a high level, it means regime change. The idea is really that we exist in a digital sphere that is overwhelmingly authoritarian, and we want to topple that and switch it to democracy, specifically in the area of social media. And so now, like a lot of, we tend to talk about decentralization. It says decentralization up there because like that's the word we tend to use. But like I prefer to focus on democracy, and these things are slightly different. Like as technologists, a lot of the time we talk about decentralization, but we end up with systems that are a poor match for democracy. You might get like decentralized systems that make everyone an individual and don't have collective properties, and that's not a good outcome. Or, that's something that's happened, someone mentioned blockchain this morning, that's something that's happened a lot in the blockchain space, where you have systems where you can vote, but like all the responsibilities are with just this one institution, and they should be unbundled. And so democracy doesn't work that way, and the way we look at it at Free Your Feeds is we want to unbundle concerns. And so we talk about social media, but you shouldn't have, in our view, like a one governance mechanism for all of social media. That's just like, too complicated. And so you want an institution for like identity and a whole bunch of different like mechanisms for feeds, and yet again, different mechanisms for sources of content moderation. These should all be separate. And that's why Free Your Feeds is working on specific projects to make that happen, one of which is Eurosky, which we're launching in multiple countries, but it's not so much a product or a protocol. It uses the AT protocol, but it's essentially infrastructure for some of the components needed to build social media so that other people can build on it. And there are experiments doing that, but like we really want to push this unbundling so that we can have like a lot of different mechanisms appear.
Okay, so thank you, Robin. Now I'm going to use just 1 minute to talk about a project I participate in, because I see some of my colleagues here and they will be very happy if I mention it. It's the Vámonos Juntas campaign, which translates as Let's Go Together or Let's Move Together, which is a project, a campaign that we launched earlier this year in January to promote a collective migration to the Fediverse, Mastodon. We actually got like 100 organizations for the civil society to sign our manifesto and to join Mastodon. To be honest, now not all of them are still active, but I think we actually got a good number of people to join the community. And now what we are doing is just giving support and giving company to people who want to join the Fediverse and to try to explain ways to engage better in this community. So if you are interested in joining the Fediverse, just look for Vámonos Juntas and we'll be there to help and support. And now we can go to the discussion. So I have lots of questions for you. And the first one has to do is for Robin. So this table is about opportunities for digital sovereignty. So we wanted to start with a very obvious question, which is to explain what is digital sovereignty in the context of decentralized social media, and why it is a concept or a chance to, why decentralized social platforms are an opportunity to build more digital sovereignty.
Right. There's a lot of confusion around the idea of sovereignty. It really is a simple idea at heart. It's the idea that you can make your own rules in your own jurisdiction. That's just what it says. You have self-determination, essentially. Now, this simple idea becomes complicated in practice because when I say in your own jurisdiction, I'm sweeping a lot of like problems under the rug because jurisdictions interconnect and they overlap a lot. And so like your knitting club will connect with like the motorcycle club, which will be like sharing, you know, housing arrangements, which will be in city, which will be et cetera, et cetera. And that means that all these sovereignties need to like somehow work together. And that is precisely why sovereignty is important. I mean, those are actually two reasons why sovereignty is important in the context of social media. One is that, well, currently we have very little of it, unless we're part of like some of these projects. We don't have sovereignty, neither at the country level, city level, any level, personal level. But also like social media is really a great example of something where we can unbundle and like find institutional arrangements that reflect the complexity of these systems and give us like these really intertwined mix of sovereign systems, sorry.
Great, thank you. So now I have a question for all of you. One of the reasons why most people don't want to use decentralized platforms is because they say that no one is using them. No one is an acceleration, but we can assume that it's not something majoritarian. Do you want your platforms or your projects to be massively adopted? And if that's a priority, what strategies are you implementing? I think maybe Amandine can start and we go there.
So do we want people to use our platform? Well, yes, obviously. But the idea is that we actually build Matrix to bring digital sovereignty to the real-time communications. So that's very much why it exists. In terms of how we've been implementing it, there are two levels. We started by focusing on what we can actually control. So we set it up as an open standard, like publishing an open specification, building some open source implementations, have a non-profit as a kind of guardian, independent guardian for the standard, and making sure we were building an actually real ecosystem. So that's the bit of the technical things that we could put in place out there to start as a foundation for building the network itself. But ultimately, it will only work if people are using it, and for this you need two things. You need to make it appealing to use, so you need at least one, but ideally more, app which is usable and simple and nice for users to be attracted to it. One which is able to actually compete with the centralized versions of the applications. And second, you need an ecosystem, you need people to build on top of it, so you need to make it appealing to build on. So you can do this by just making it simple for them to come in. And then you can also start building bridges to bring more users. It's an open network. You need to create the network effect. So by bridging existing systems, you bring users into the network, attracting more of them. With the nice apps on top, people start to natively use the network itself, and it's just start building up and bring the sovereignty to different people. But the variety of apps, the variety of providers is key for digital sovereignty, because from our perspective, my way of looking at it, it's pretty simple. For me, digital sovereignty is choice. Choose where you store your things, choose how you access it, which interface, and be free to change. If you're not free to change provider, you're not sovereign. Wherever it's stored, even if it's a Spanish app hosted in Spain and you're Spanish, if you're not free to move, then you're not sovereign.
Okay, Andy?
100%. Yeah. Do we want the Fediverse and Mastodon to be massively adopted? Absolutely. Also, they're open standards. The most important thing is that everyone is using open standards, because that enables this interoperability that we've just been discussing. For example, at Mastodon, we've got a new version coming out in any day now, which is implementing quote posts, which is something people have been asking for, because people want features that they want to use. So when we did that, we said, well, this is something we're adding to the Fediverse as a whole. We've got some ideas. So from a technical perspective, we said, well, here is our specification. This is how we're doing this, to encourage other parts of the Fediverse network to do the same thing, to follow that same specification. So that's the technical level of how we want to enable mass adoption or wider adoption, broader adoption. At a practical level, we're also making things easier to use. So quote post being one of the things that people have said, well, we don't want to move from a legacy platform because we don't find something we're familiar with on that platform in Mastodon yet. We've got 2 new designers that are on the team now who are helping to make Mastodon and the Fediverse, and Mastodon in particular in this case, a more delightful place to be. We want to build an app that people enjoy using. We want to be a place where people come to connect with their communities and enjoy being there. There's less value if that's a chore. We want to make it fun. And beyond that, from the perspective going back to the providers conversation that Amandine was just having, we've started to offer hosting from our Mastodon organization in Germany to enable organizations now to join Mastodon and have their own Mastodon host with their own domain. So we're here talking about civic platforms. The city of Blois has just announced themselves as having their own instance this week on our hosting services. The European Commission is one that we host. But that doesn't help us if we just become a singular big host for lots and lots of domains. That's not the goal here, right? We want many people to host Mastodon, to run their own servers, to give that choice, to give that diversity of governance of those services, and to build resilience into the network. This is how we build billionaire-proof systems, by putting that infrastructure everywhere so that it cannot be captured by a rich white guy in Silicon Valley, because that's who it will be, right? Having been through that myself, my previous employer, that's not a fun experience. So let's not do that again.
Yeah, I mean, same. At the heart of it, I think something that, I've been in open source 30 years, and I'll take my share of the blame for that, and many of us can, is we have to understand that usability is decentralizing as a property itself. Because if it's not usable, then you're not going to get people on it. So who are you decentralizing to? And if people have to come anyway and they hate it, then you've just transferred power from some companies to a priesthood of geeks, but that's not winning, right? Even if I'm a geek priest myself, that's not I don't think that's the world we want, right? And so, in terms of the free feeds system, we're really building infrastructure for, I would say, many reasons. I could go on forever, but 2 primary reasons. One is the AT protocol has strong decentralization properties, but if you have a decentralized protocol and there's only one provider, it's not working really well, is it? So it's sort of we're trying to solve the problem Andy described from the other side, which is Bluesky is currently hosting a lot of the infrastructure. So we're hosting parallel, separate infrastructure that's interoperable with it to create counterpower in the network itself. And the other reason we're running infrastructure without running a product ourselves is we want a lot of people to build completely different experiences with their own different governance models, with their own different modalities on top of that. And that's already happening. And we're seeing it's still early days, but we're seeing Flashes, which is a small Instagram-alike thing emerging in Germany. We're seeing Tangled, which is sort of like a GitHub-ish thing that's social coding from Finland. Norway is experimenting with the idea of having a way of certifying yourself as a citizen without revealing your identity, so that you can have this sort of public sphere where people can know that you're not a Russian bot during Norwegian elections and stuff like that. So there's a lot of experiments, and that's basically what we want to foster with this approach that's usability through diversity and resilience.
Okay, thank you. Next question is a bit more specific, because I wanted to ask you about an ongoing debate that is happening about usability and user experience in decentralized platforms. There are some people that argue that decentralized platforms should be, or that decentralization should be seamless, meaning that you don't notice that your data is being centralized and that your UX is the same as using a centralized platform. And other people think that users should be aware of what is happening with the data, so they should really have some friction and they need to take some time configuring the tools, so they actually understand the decentralized nature of what they are using. So what do you think about this? Maybe we can change the order if you want.
I don't know, do you want the...
I can.
Andy's never gone first.
I can go first. Yeah, why not? So my first of all, my personal view, people should know where the data is and be interested in where the data is, because I'm an engaged citizen and I want to understand my place and how the systems work. But that requires education, and we all know that it's also very complex. We as a techie, often make it very difficult, and other systems make it very difficult. Capitalism doesn't necessarily want you to know what all the flows of value are that ladder up to the billionaire, right? So that's a philosophical, yes, I think that's a good thing to know. If we look at what I've heard and seen people complain about on all three of these systems, right? So AT Proto, Activity, Pub, Fediverse, and Matrix, people often bounce off them or feel less willing to engage with them because there's relearning involved, because it's not exactly the same as the thing they used to do. Well, I keep coming back to a thought process that says, well, every time I've grown as a person is because I've learned something new. We as humans fall into these patterns of getting comfortable and then not wanting to make changes. But actually what we do then is we often cut ourselves off from a lot of new learning. Actually what you'll find when you start to pick up some of these apps and spend a bit more than 5 minutes with them is that they're not quite as different as you thought they might be. And if they are different, that could be for good reasons. Now, let me give you a practical example related to this quote post thing I mentioned earlier. This literally came up as a conversation with my team this morning. What should happen when somebody pastes a link to another post on Mastodon into a post on Mastodon? How should that show up? Should the user be shown a big modal pop-up that they have to dismiss saying, are you sure you meant to quote this post? Every single time the user does that. Or should it be just automatically shown to them that there's going to be a quote, or should it be invisible? Which one of those is likely to cause people to bounce off the feature and not use it? Similarly, in one of the earlier versions, release betas, there was a change where we switched the button which currently does boost into popping up a menu now to say, do you want to boost or quote? And people got upset about the change. So we need to find a balance between what actually works in terms of that transparency and ease of use and people's understanding of the system. And it's very difficult because humans can be quite lazy. But I think that spending a bit of time understanding the systems we use can also be really valuable.
So we need to find the balance.
Yeah.
So the debate is still on.
I am not going to settle the debate either way. I'm going to say these are the things that we should think about.
Yeah.
I have a strong preference for helping more people to learn and feel more informed about what we're doing with technology.
Okay. Do you want to add anything?
Go ahead.
Basically, I'd love to be wrong, but the thing is, if you want people to actually understand what digital sovereignty is and make the choice which is right for them, then there is some level of learning which will need to happen. Like, you need to understand that your data are saved somewhere and not on the Wi-Fi, like my 9-year-old say. Like, So there is some level of education, but like people have been educating themselves all along. Like we got computers, we got internet, we got email, like you learned all along. So for me, it's just a next level of evolution to understand that, no, it's not just a big thing where your data is going and you have control and you should think about it a little bit. But I agree that the friction for this education and this learning should be minimal because otherwise it's never going to happen. And it should be nice, it should be enjoyable. Something which I was thinking about is when WhatsApp suddenly started to put like big ads everywhere on the bus stops around end-to-end encryption. Well, thank you, WhatsApp. I don't have to explain my users what end-to-end encryption means anymore because you've done it for me. And that's this sort of things. It's little by little. If everyone is talking about it, and try to explain it with nice, subtle thing in the app at first, then it becomes natural, and then we just move forward. So yeah, we need education, but we need it nice and soft and as a joint thing. It's evolution for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to think. I mean, I agree with a lot of what's being said, with maybe some moderate like differences. I think, again, to go back to the experience we've all had with open source, I think if you can tinker, it's empowering. But if you must tinker, it's alienating. And so in my mind, that's really where that friction is that, yes, it should be possible to find out and to have control, but you really mustn't have that on the critical path to things, because then people just like lose their minds. I don't think out of laziness. I think if we treated, the rest of society the way we've been treating computers, like people would just it would be impossible to go through your day, right? It's the same debates we have in privacy. Like if every time you picked, a piece of food out of the fridge, it would be like, oh, would you like to get salmonella? Yes or no? No, it's just like, fuck no, you buy it, it's safe. Right? And it should be the same in digital. Like you buy it, you get it, you use it, it's safe. Like you don't get a prompt or like a million indications that maybe you have to decide for yourself as an individual without any expert guidance, without any governance, how these things work. And so, the part where I disagree slightly is when Andy, you were saying like that people have to relearn, and maybe it's because they've grown comfortable with things like that. I mean, part of that is true, but I think it's also a product of so many people having grown accustomed to environments in which they have no agency, that it's not even that they don't want to learn, is that the brain mechanisms to like learn how these things work, or like to understand that you have agency, are no longer there. And there's actually a lot of work done by development actors in India around the capacity to aspire, and where how like a lot of poor people were not complaining about their situation because they'd grown up in an environment in which doing something differently was not even like thinkable. And the transformation that they managed to carry out was just like even showing movies of different lives that were possible, just like started to get people to shift to a different perspective. I think that's the kind of like work we should be doing.
I think that's a great way of describing it, and actually it reminds me of my experience working with Apple products under Steve Jobs, which is that once he decided a way the product was going to work, there was no point in me trying to fight it, right? You're absolutely right. I think the agency piece is absolutely key to that conversation. Because again, when I was at Twitter, we could make a change and everybody would have to follow that change. When I'm building for the Fediverse, there is a multiplicity of apps who can make their own choices about how the data should be presented, how the post should be shown to the users, and the users can choose which ones suit them. So I think that is a great challenge to the way that I phrase it. Thank you.
A challenge with agreement.
Great. So next question is for Andy and Amandine, because you've already talked about governance, but I would like you to elaborate further about the models of governance in your projects.
Okay, great. So Mastodon is an open source project. Technically, it's under the AGPL license, which means that anybody can fork it as long as they give accreditation to where it's come from. And anybody can run a server, which sounds chaotic because we can't control who's running it, and it's open source. And that comes with a lot of freedoms that can go in different directions. So there's a lot of collaboration required. And over time that has built up. There have been different efforts to build covenantal governance. So there's something called the Mastodon Server Covenant, which essentially suggests that people agree to follow certain standards of rules around people's behaviors in order to be listed in a directory. There are ways that we are thinking about improving that in the future. There is an organization I mentioned that I work for that owns a trademark. So there is some element of enforcement possible there. As I mentioned, that's being moved into a broader foundation, so there won't be any individual ownership of that in the future. That's a goal, because we do not want to be something that can be overtaken by billionaires. I can't tell you too much about the future state. I would encourage you to keep an eye on our blog and posts from myself and my colleagues in the next couple of weeks. And then there'll be some more to learn then, I hope.
So on the matrix side, one of the key things when we started this is if we want it to be an open network, we need an independent actor who is actually responsible for guarding it somehow. This is why we set up the foundation as a not-for-profit, independent from any commercial entity. Basically, the foundation has 4 missions. The first one is guard the specification. Like Matrix is the main deliverable of it is this specification, which is meant to be kind of unique. I use the word canonical. I've been told, well, this is way too technical, Amandine. So I'm not using canonical, but that's still very much what it is. There is one version of it, and it's retrocompatible. If you say, I am matrix compliant, means you're compliant with this specification, and you shouldn't be able to federate with anyone out there. We're trying to avoid the fragmentation. So that's one of the missions of the foundation, and there is a spec core team who is basically the gatekeeper. Anyone can propose changes, but the spec core team is going to validate that, one, it actually is aligned with the long-term mission of Matrix, and second, is not favoring one single company or player in the ecosystem. Then the foundation promotes the standard because we want a big ecosystem of people building on top of it and grow this ecosystem, get people to collaborate, work together. And then there is the moderation effort because, again, big network, many servers, lots of different code of conduct on them, and obviously you have bad actors. So the foundation doesn't provide any implementation, no server, no client, etc., but it does provide moderation tooling as open source for any of the server administrators to use, and that's quite quite important to keep the network secure and safe to use.
Okay. So this question is for the 3 of you, because when we talk about decentralized governance, we usually mean data hosting decentralization, or maybe sometimes you let users or people to make suggestions on the code, but it's usually only for people who are techies or who can code. Are you thinking in other ways to make platforms like more democratic? For example, do you think users, regular users that don't know how to code, should have a say on the features and on the development of these tools? Do you think so? Do you have any project? Yes. Are you thinking more about how to do it?
Yes.
But how are you going to do it?
So, I can give some examples.
Go for it, Robin. Yeah.
So, I mean, like, the AT protocol is designed to unbundle things. So it's really not about, like, governing one aspect or decentralizing just one aspect. It's just, like, breaking all the functions apart. And the idea behind that is, say you want to create a feed, you know, whatever, it's the cats feed. I like cats, right? And, well, then you can have, like, a very narrow thing that only does the cats feed, doesn't have to worry about data storage, identity, content moderation, nothing else. It only does the cats feed. And the idea is that because there are, like, thousands of feeds, you can then have governance over just that. And there's now like an ecosystem of tools, there's like Gray Social, there's a number of other things that make governing these broken out things easier. And so in the case of feeds, you could have a feed where it's just like you and 5 friends curating, you know, I want to put cats on that feed, and then anyone can subscribe to it. But it could be like a much more complicated governance system if you wanted a, you know, much more curated feed, for instance, for emergency events or something like that. But it's not just feeds. You can have like content moderation sources. You can have a block list. So again, you can switch to like having a block list that is managed by maybe your group chat, or maybe just by you, or maybe by a foundation that's monitoring hate speech and does that. So you can break apart the entire system and have like all these little pieces of governance happening independently, with the protocol serving as the glue between these things. And so you mentioned like using, you know, more democratic democratic control over features themselves. In the AT protocol universe, in the atmosphere, there's this system called Black Sky that's grounded in like, Black American communities having their own like, sort of like universe with all kinds of stuff, and they use police for like feature development, etc. So this brings in a lot of non-technical users who will say like, I would like moderation to work this way, I would like this other thing to work that way. So yeah, it's entirely possible. There's a lot of experimentation waiting to happen around this.
I think there's a ton of... The exciting thing about working with open standards is truly open standards as opposed to working with third-party big tech companies with an open API in quotation marks, which I used to work on in a previous life, he said sadly, is that the innovation can come from that community, right? So absolutely we are open to people asking for features, and we do what we can to add features, whether or not those features have been contributed through GitHub through a technical channel, because people are technically able, or whether they're asking us as users. We have to then balance, what we can build in each release. But a lot of the features can also come on the glass. What we used to, there's me talking 90s tech speak on the glass, on the device, on the app, right? So people can build apps that suit them. People can ask those app makers to build things that suit them. So one of the things I've loved working now with social networks for over a decade is that, unfortunately, for the big platforms in particular, but generally, a lot of accessibility features are not baked in to the platforms, because the people that build those platforms do not have particular requirements that make them think, enable them to think naturally in a way that it helps them to build features that make the apps more accessible to more people. So that's a great thing there. So absolutely, there's opportunities for us to have people ask for features, and to have people come in and get involved. Again, in terms of the broader network, we're part of the Fediverse. There's already a standards body, the W3C, that's involved there. And there's also a kind of an additional process called the Fediverse enhancement proposals, which is a bit more, there's a process, but it's not through a big standards body like the W3C, so it's a little bit more flexible for people to make proposals for things that they have as ideas for new features, and then it's up to different apps to adopt them, which I think, again, gives us a lot of flexibility.
It's a bit similar for us in terms of every app being able to add the features they really want and customize it to their niche markets, etc., etc. What is interesting is that sometimes some features turn up in some apps, and then they're being pushed into the protocol so that everyone else can use them. I think, if I'm not mistaken, things like reactions initially started as, in one app, started to implement reactions before we had time to actually put it into the spec itself. So then, after a while, it became part of the specification. So in terms of amending the spec, I touched on it. Anyone can propose, but we have the gatekeeper body of the spec core team on it. And then if you look at apps like Element, for example, as an open source company, it's a bit complicated, and we haven't fully figured it out, because if you're trying to make revenue from an app, it's quite hard to open it up to anyone out there to contribute their own features, because you want to keep some level of control, because you're serving a very specific market, etc., etc. But that's just like open source governance when you're building a user-facing app, basically.
Okay. So yeah, open governance is always a big challenge, but I want to move on to other challenges. Decentralized networks often struggle with fragmentation. So I'd like to ask what design or protocol decisions can help ensure interoperability. And together with this question, I'd like to make you another question that can be a bit more tricky or polemical, which is, do you think that every social system should be always fully interoperable with others, or maybe we should set some boundaries? You can start for the first one, which is easier, I guess.
I can start. Obviously, we love interoperability. That's why we've been doing Matrix. And we also very much believe that open standards is the right way of doing interoperability, which is why we've been trying to work with the Digital Markets Act and pushing for open standard, et cetera, et cetera. And open standard doesn't necessarily mean like you need to go via the IETF or W3C, etc. If it's just the tech that is used by most of the market, it's kind of de facto standard. The boundaries, I think basically the differentiation when you're building on an interoperable ecosystem is provided by the value you add on top. So there should be this baseline, which is interoperable, and then value on top. If everyone is adding the same value, that becomes part of the standard, and you just move up the stack this way. In terms of decisions and strategies, we really try to limit the fragmentation by having one single specification, which is unique, and having this governance on the specification that I touched on.
You want to add something?
So, I think it's interesting. Open standards means that people can choose what they build and how they build with them. And we already have bridging between AT protocol and ActivityPub because both things are, in the case of ActivityPub, a blessed W3C standard. In the case of AT Proto, something that's going to IETF. So, those things exist and people have already been able to build without, charge to build a bridge between them. So you don't necessarily have to have direct interoperability at the protocol level between those two worlds. And there are other situations where there are apps. There's one called Warfarin, which is a Tumblr-like app, which builds support for both protocols into the app. So you can publish to both parts of the social web. So that's possible already. Is there a good reason to have, what did you call them, boundaries between them? I think the boundaries typically come from a social app perspective in the terms of the apps, in terms of how the apps use the data. That's why you have apps like in the ActivityPub world, PixelFed and PeerTube and Mobilisant and Mastodon, because they all have different focuses, images, video, meetings, and short form, for example. So I think that's where those boundaries tend to naturally come because the information you want to share and the way that you want to interact with that information differs. Personal opinion, but that's how I see the world.
So I think fragmentation is good, actually. And I know I've said this multiple times, but when you live in a society, which all of us tend to do, you tend to see the world functioning in a relatively seamless way, right? You wake up in the morning, you switch on the light, you're not thinking about oh God, the electricity company is not interoperable with the transportation system I'm going to use later. All these, you get up, the coffee works, you bought it from a shop, the fridge is safe, you put on clothes, you go outside. All of these things mesh into each other, even though in practice they're completely fragmented into independent agencies, different levels of government, different governance systems, often from different countries, integrated in multiple ways, and the digital world should work the same way. And so to be a little bit technical, the transformation that we're sort of going for with AT Proto is the idea that, if we're thinking of the old days of good Twitter, when, say Amandine is posting something on Twitter, she says I like cats, and I'm reading it on Twitter saying oh, she likes cats, I hope you like cats. The only way I can know that she personally did say that and that it is actually what she said is by trusting Twitter, because the authority in the system comes down to Twitter. I'm trusting them to have authenticated her correctly and to be representing the message correctly. And what we're trying to shift to be slightly, again, sorry for being a bit technical, but we're trying to shift to what's known as self-certifying data structures, such that, again, Amandine will post, I like cats. Maybe I'm reading a feed from Andy that's picking up her posts, But the thing is, I don't have to trust Andy that she really said that. I can actually not know this guy, completely distrust him. Maybe I even think he's a jerk. I don't think that, but like maybe I even think that. But I can still trust that the post the Amandine's post that I'm getting through him is correct. And this like removal of authority means you can fragment as much as you want and have all these systems. And in my mind, that's really where, you know, I say this a lot, and like I know it's a little bit weird, but like I really think protocol architecture and institutional design are the same discipline, and like people in both just use different words. And this like splintering and this fragmentation actually allows us to bring the two together in a way that's much more effective.
Okay. I ask about boundaries because there's another debate going on, which has to do with the possibility of big, powerful actors coming and basically ruining everything. That's a fear that some people may have. The elephant in the room is Meta, but we can think about other big tech companies or maybe big institutions like European Union or whoever that may come if these tools are massively adopted. And some people are afraid that the imbalance of power can mean that these powerful actors can somehow stop the decentralized atmosphere that we are trying to build. So the question is, how can decentralized networks resist capture? And how are you building decentralization to be robust enough to resist power imbalances between different actors?
Who goes first?
I mean, I think this already happens organically in the Fediverse, which is that Threads implements ActivityPub. It partially implements ActivityPub, and a bunch of people that have servers in the Fediverse said we don't want anything to do with Meta, and they blocked them, and they said we're not going to talk to them. So that's not Meta coming in and saying, right, we're going to be in charge of the Fediverse now. They failed to do that. If that's what they wanted to do, they have a lot of users. And that's not necessarily the same as there being that many Fediverse users, because in their system it's something you have to switch on to do that. So I think the choice and the local agency of those server operators to make those choices can help to avoid it. You specifically referenced the European Union. We're excited that, for example, the European Commission has a presence in the Fediverse. And I'm particularly excited. I wrote a blog post last year called Fediverse for Freedom, which made the case for public institutions, civic institutions, having a standards-based public comms channel to avoid capture. Because suddenly we have bad actors on the other side of the Atlantic who own all of the accounts, essentially, for all of the European governments, because everybody has an account there. And that's not a good situation, right? So I think there's a very strong case for those institutions to have accounts in the Fediverse or on open platforms, to invest in those platforms, to support those things. All the users have a choice whether or not they're going to follow them. We're not going to push that content into everybody's feeds because there's no algorithm there. So we already see that not everybody follows the European Union, the European Commission. More people should do that if there's good quality content that they want to see. But there's a lot of user agency and server owner agency that enables that to not happen. That's not to say there is zero risk ever of bad things happening on the internet in the future. But I feel pretty good about the way that the Fediverse as a specific, as my bit of the stage, is operating today to avoid that.
I'm glad you're optimistic, because it's not that we don't have examples of big actors
ruining
everything in the past.
Absolutely, and there are other ways for them to attempt to do that, whether that's through misinformation and other channels as well, to cause problems in those systems. So we absolutely need to be aware of those and work proactively to avoid them as well.
Cool.
Yeah, basically I agree in terms of the magic of the decentralization is its resilience. and the choice it brings to people and the freedom to do whatever. If they don't want to interoperate with this specific player, they don't have to. I agree there is a risk, especially in early days. Like when we started Matrix, we thought like if someone big picks it up, and then it becomes like Matrix is the protocol for X bad brand, then it may destroy the project. But if you get to a point where your project is either big enough that the rest of the network can stand by itself, or you have at least two 800-pound gorillas in the room to balance it out, then that helps. In the end, it's I think the question was formulated around like, what if one big player comes in to this decentralized system and breaks it? Decentralization for the sake of decentralization makes no sense. Like, we're decentralizing for the digital sovereignty, for the agency, for the freedom, which like solves the initial problem.
So I'm optimistic about what we can build, but I'm not optimistic about what we have today, to be honest. I think none of us is anywhere near ready enough for the adversaries that we're taking on. And so let's have a point of disagreement in this panel at least once. I disagree that federation is actually sufficient for capture resistance in the face of a determined, large actor, because we can test that today. Like, I really don't like what Google does with data. Personally, I think that's a shared thing. I don't think I could defederate my email server from Gmail. And that's because there's a level of engagement such that 85% of users are on Gmail, and like most of the rest are on Microsoft anyway. And because those are engaged users, I can't like really like pull away and defederate. So defederation is an important tool in the toolbox, but I don't think it's sufficient for those actors. And like, the way I look at it, and we're not there yet, no one is there yet, which is what worries me and why we're working on this, is like, if you, I don't know if any of you like are familiar with like graphs analysis, but like when you have these big graphs that are densely connected, people in that field talk about hairball graphs, right? Things you can't read it because it's a hairball. And like in my mind, resilient democratic governance looks like a hairball. It's not an attractive model. You can't go to people and go like, let's make hairball governance, but actually we should. And so that's why I've repeated this 20 times on this panel already, but that's why I really believe that we need to create dense, redundant, heavily reliant governance at many levels with a lot of different nuances to what they can do, so that we can like have the power to push back on any kind of overwhelming actor. And I think this can be built in the Fediverse. In my mind, like these protocols should all work together. They actually technically can. It's a question of like having the money to make it happen. These are things where we should encourage actually this diversity of protocols to all work more together, because it creates that hairball effect that gives greater resilience to the whole.
I think something we haven't touched on in terms of challenges is definitely one of the last points you made, Robin, in terms of the funding of all of this. And we talked about educating users on why would you want to look for digitally sovereign solutions and these sort of things. But we also need to teach people how to buy these, like all the organizations who actually go and deploy Mastodon servers, Matrix servers, etc., or build on top of them. Then we definitely need to fix the way all this ecosystem is funded. And users need to help support the projects, need to buy from the right people, the one who actually build the things, etc., etc. So that's a completely separate panel of its own, but I think it's quite important to put it on the table. It's not just about the users and making app easy to use. It's also like these, we cannot fight against big gorillas and be alternatives to closed system, which are valued trillions of dollars, as Francesca was saying this morning, if with a little funding which is flying around. And funding shouldn't be coming just from government. It should be coming from the people using it as well, and not individuals, but organizations using it.
Not just individuals. I think, yeah, they're both,
Yeah, no,
both,
it's like
both fit really
mostly-
well. And another thing that Francesca said this morning, which I picked up on and thought was great, was that focus that she put at the beginning on cities, because I think that they are a level of governance and something that you said earlier, Robin, about people living in society, you know, people existing in the world, right? So one of the things that I love about the Fediverse, having come from a world where I spent 15 years as a user of Twitter and believed in a vision of the global town square, when you come to moderate that town square and govern that town square, it's impossible, because the only level at which you can do it is at what we call in English the lowest common denominator, right? So everyone is governed in theory. It's definitely not the case on that platform anymore, but at an equal level, which is the absolute minimum or minimum requirement for like human behavior that is seen as acceptable across the whole world, right? We all live in different communities. We live in different work groups, soccer clubs, whatever we go to, we have different patterns of behavior. So there is a lot of cultural overlap, and I think actually having communities, whether that's club-sized or city-sized, but I think city-sized is probably a good one, at which we have a level of self-determination, agency, control, ability to resist billionaire takeover is very strong. So I do want to advocate for that as well. I think that's a really, again, being here, having also this month or in the last 4 weeks been at Empedera Live down in Malaga in Spain, and having participated in some of these great conversations, I think that is an interesting scale to me.
Okay, so thank you and congratulations, because we are really on time on our schedule. So now we have 10 minutes left for questions of the audience. Yeah, I think now it makes sense to use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. So I had a question. It's related to the capture question that you raised. Is there anything or any thought that you put into when you thought about the institutional design of your own organizations? Like, was there something where you said, as we scale, we need some sort of steward organization or overseeing entity that kind of is there when there's a potential mission drift or a capture or a buy-in, all those things to protect kind of the mission of your own social media?
Well, on our side, yeah, we designed it from the get-go with the foundation, with a clear mission and limits, and try to make sure there is one organization who is controlling what Matrix, like Matrix does what we wanted it to be in the first place. So that's how we took it.
So you're asking that question. I'm the head of comms for an organization and I have a CEO. I wasn't there when he created the project. So I don't know what he thought as he was building it out, but certainly in the last 12 months, he and the organization, the team, have come to a conclusion, and he wrote about it back in January. We wrote a blog post about transitioning to a non-profit because he doesn't want that risk. I'm not here to hero worship my CEO. I have a lot of respect for his choice because he could have taken made different choices. And there's a process to go through, and it's frustrating to some of us, perhaps, that it's been, we wrote about it in January and here we are in November, and, next stage is to be announced. So that's in progress. It wasn't, as far as I know, something that he intended or built into building Mastodon. He built a social network that he thought, because he didn't like the way that Twitter at the time was going and he wanted to build something different and better. And by hitching that to ActivityPub and that decentralized network, he gave it that resilience, or it inherited that resilience that comes from some of the things we've spoken about. But I think there was a point at which that arrived, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, yes, we're thinking about it. We've actually taken actions towards it. I wouldn't say personally that I feel that we've done enough in that direction. In large part because I think a lot of the time when we have these conversations about what the right governance is and how do you protect it for capture through the organization itself, is we don't look over long enough timescales. And so, a mechanism that I've definitely seen at play at W3C as like someone who's been very involved in the governance there, is the iron law of oligarchy, right? Where there's organization, there's oligarchy, and there's actually very good empirical studies showing that peer production systems over a long enough time period become oligarchies and become captured, and there's very little experience in like reliberating them afterwards. And so for the short term, with like free off feeds, Eurosky, I'm reasonably confident. We have like custodians, we have like, a lot of transparency, a lot of civil society organizations are looking into it. It was backed by People versus Big Tech. That's like a very large, system with a lot of people who will be like crawling all over it and creating trouble if there's trouble. But I don't feel we've done enough for like the 10, 20-year horizon. In my mind, the key to that approach with something like Eurosky is actually to govern as little as possible. We're trying to create a system where we govern like very basic, very elementary infrastructure and let other people build other things that they will then have to govern separately. That at least means that if we get captured or if we fuck up and become an oligarchy ourselves, then we don't need to be composted. People can just go do something else.
Hi. Thank you all for this.
Yeah, about the iron law or oligarchy. Hi, Pierre. I just wonder, what do you say? I was thinking about AI, if they can replace the oligarchy. I mean, XAI, like we supervise them and check that they are not doing any wrong. If it's a possibility, what do you say?
Just to be clear on the question, like, are you thinking of like using AI for governance as a substitute for oligarchy? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean in organizations, all organizations like trying to find a way to avoid oligarchs, like they becoming governed by elite.
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
Okay, if democracy is something without an elite, like we try to reach a state where anyone that listen or in the panel can answer this, do you think it's possible in the future to represent the elite with AI, that benevolent AI that we can supervise?
No. Because you have two options. This is going to veer into philosophy very quickly, so I'll make it short. You have two options. Either it's a tool, and it works for you, and it works based on your agency. And in that case, you're not automating anything. You're just like maybe reducing your labor. Or it's a technological superstructure that's controlling how you behave. And in that case, you're not doing anything democratic. And AI is not anywhere near consciousness, intelligence, and certainly not agency that would be required for either of those two things. And therefore, it can't replace any kind of governance, elites, and it can't have benevolence.
Yeah, but I was going to say, as soon as you start imbuing things like benevolence into something, then who's to say what's benevolent, right? So absolutely, I 100% agree. Excellent answer.
You need agency to be benevolent in the first place. Yeah.
Okay, so we are running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to ask you to make two questions in a row, so in case they overlap, you can answer them
Perfect.
at the same time.
Question, thank you all for a very interesting panel. My question is for Amandine. We got the news a couple of weeks ago that the Decidim, the French Digital Directorate, was part of the Matrix Foundation now. And I wanted to ask you how this affects, if it affects the governance of the foundation in some aspect. Thank you.
have a microphone. Do you want that mic?
Hello, okay. Yeah, my question is to push a little bit further. You talked about resisting takeover, the ability to defederate, and so on. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about the licensing. And now this mic is cutting out. As a strategy. So, for example, we have the example of Truth Social, the extreme right Trump network, leveraging open source software to build their platform. And we are in a world of ascendant authoritarianism and hard right actors building their parallel social media ecosystem. And I'd love to hear, has any of that made any of you rethink the approach to licensing that says, well, it's a diverse world, it's pluralism, we'll let anybody build what they want, and then people can just kind of decide to federate. Have any of you considered adopting ethical provisions in the open source licensing that would limit certain types of uses? Or is that just a non-starter for all of your projects?
Okay, so they don't overlap at all. So you want to answer the first question, and then you go.
So on the first one, basically, the way the foundation gets revenue is to get members to subscribe to it, and they pay annual membership, and it makes budget for the foundation to do its job. Genome is paying a membership. That's it. They don't have any more impact on the foundation than any of the other members. They're just part of the ecosystem. It just gives them more visibility on how the foundation works, ability to be elected on the board if they're elected, blah, blah, blah. So it's like nothing, no impact at all. And if I just reply to this one, we haven't got into thinking about adding ethics into our licenses. I think it did come up at some point, but like ethics is very complicated because you don't have, like, the world is not black and white, and even if there are extreme cases which can be considered as simple, there are always gray areas which come very closely to it. And like, for example, at Element, we have an ethics policy, and we don't want to sell to any sort of governments. We have tried to get a set of rules, and even that is like the amount of time we spend debating on deals coming in and saying, like, how does it actually fit with our ethics policies? It's like, I think that would be ideal if it was very simple, but I don't think it can ever get simple. So.
How about a bright line, like no genocidal regimes can use the software?
Yeah, but it's like it easily gets into gray areas. So I suspect it will come on the table again, because that's like our organization is very engaged in these sort of things. But right now we haven't done anything. But if it comes on the table, it's going to be a tough discussion.
Has this made me reconsider my relationship with open source? A tiny bit, but I do believe in open source and human collaboration. I share what I imagine are your concerns about misuse or bad use of good stuff, good technology. And I, as a human, I'm very upset and frustrated by it. It's very difficult to police. Apart from anything else, in terms of like, if you write on a license, I'm not talking about Mastodon right now, I'm just generally talking about software and licensing and open source, and say nobody bad, that I deem to be bad, can use this. How do you then go and enforce that license? So that sounds like weasel words to some extent, in terms of like me making an excuse for it. I don't know whether this conversation has been had at Mastodon in exactly the way that you framed it. And it has happened more than once that a regime that we may not like has created something using the software as a base. And people have naturally defederated or blocked it in some way. And there's some resilience and healing mechanism there. It's challenging. It's the nature of open source, and yeah, I imagine that Robin will have something great to say on this topic.
I'll try. Now that you've teed me up.
Because I'm tailing off, but yeah.
You're tailing off to the philosopher on the
Yeah, there we
panel.
go.
It hasn't made me reconsider my relationship to open source. It's made me reconsider my relationship to ethics. Basically, there's great examples of this. If you look at the W3C's ethical web principles or the W3C vision, you have all these grandiose statements about how it's for the good of humanity, yada, 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 yada. And this normally translates to the entire web. I don't know if you feel that's having an effect, but I don't, right? We don't need fucking ethics, we need power. And so the thing is, like, if we could put it in a license, we could put it in a protocol, all of that, and like I'm sure I agree with like what your red lines are, even like the other colors of lines, all of it, right? But like, how are you going to get it enforced? Like, Andy mentioned enforcement. Like, let's say like Truth Social. Are you going to go to the US and sue Trump?
Yeah, we've got a dictator on the throne in the US at the moment who's ignoring every rule put in front of him. I would argue that, they're going to do it anyway, which is frustrating as hell. But yeah,
it's not going to work. So what I'm much more interested in, rather than like, we could work on ethical statements. And yeah, as Amandine said, like, ethics is really fucking complicated. We've been doing it for, 25 centuries of recorded history, like probably way more, probably like 10,000 years that way before we started writing it down. And like, we're not going to solve that with like ethical statements in the license, I think. It might make us feel good, but I don't think it'll have impact. However, if we make these systems governable in a way that gives us power, then we can push back. Yeah, defederation in that case is definitely one option. It's a bit nuclear, but that it's appropriate in that case. And I'm sure like with a whole host of other governance mechanisms, we can push back. And then we can like make them stop existing, which is like the end.
And we absolutely need to stay vigilant is the other thing. As a community of people who want to do good things in the world, we need to stay vigilant. We need to support one another. We need to build power. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we are out of time. So just to finish, I would like to quote what you just said, just to paraphrase you and say, we don't need no fucking ethics. We don't need more fucking protocols. We need decentralization of power.